Okay, hi. We're gonna continue on here. Hear a few stories from Grandmama. You wanna just tell us whatever you wanna talk about, Mom?
Okay. One thing, just sitting here thinking through this about what I wanted to tell, um, grapevines have always been a lot in my memory growing up. First of all, my dad was really big on families, and he had a lot of family that lived around us, and a lot of them were women that had not married, and he felt some responsibility for keeping up with them, checking on them, having them know his family, and they were called Sister and Aunt Maggie. Those two lived together. So every Sunday afternoon, we would make a little visit. Sometimes my sisters and I kicking and screaming, but we did because it was important to Dad for us to do that for a short time. And when we got over there, they went in the house and talked, and they had a huge, huge grapevine out in their backyard. Well, we would make a beeline for the grapevine, and there were scuppernong grapes out there. I don't know if you all know scuppernong grapes. They're a
No.
different look, different color, different flavor. Um, and some people make scuppernong wine, and it's nasty.
It's sweet.
And it's not very good wine. But anyway, we loved playing under that grapevine and plucking grapes. The next memory I have of grapevines, my cousin Johnny Luke and his sister Mary Frances would come and visit us in the summertime. We had a great relationship with them. Mary Frances was 2 years older than me, and Johnny was 2 years younger. And they would come and visit us in the summer for a couple of weeks, and then we would go into the mountains where they lived and visit with them for a couple of weeks. So that was always so much fun in the summertime to do. Well, there we had a big grapevine in my yard in Wagram, and it was fun to eat those grapes too. But one time, Johnny decided he was going to climb up on top of the grapevine because he could get so many more grapes. And we said, "Don't do that. That's not safe. You know, some of it you're not. It's not going to be able to do that." But he did it anyway. He shinnied up one of the poles and he got on top of the grapevine, and he was just having a big time finding the grapes and throwing them down to us. The next thing we knew, he had come through one of the areas of where the grapevine, where it was not real solid, and
Oh
fell
no.
and hit the ground and broke his arm.
Ooh.
That was the second day they were there that summer. He had a cast on his arm, which meant he could not go swimming. He couldn't do a lot of things for the rest of that time they were there visiting. And that part was sad. But it was really hot, and we did not have air conditioning in my house at that time, big old high ceilings and high windows. And he said every night, he called my mom and he said, "Aunt Ann, there are worms crawling in my cast." Well, we finally figured out it was sweat rolling down in his cast on his arm. So
No,
he couldn't
man.
do anything that whole time they were there. And that was really sad. I remember that part.
Well, how long were they there?
They were there. They always came for 2 weeks.
Okay.
We would go and visit them for 2 weeks. And when we would do that, their father was a minister, and he was the minister of seven little tiny churches in the mountains of North Carolina. And we would go to the Bible schools and help out and all this sort of stuff. And then we decided that we would have a play every summer in their yard. And we rigged up between two clotheslines a big old sheet that was like the backdrop. And then we would perform for the people, the kids in the neighborhood, and we would charge them a nickel. And they would come pay a nickel to see us do these ridiculous routines. And then we had refreshments, and they didn't have any more money, so we would refund the nickel to them, and then they would pay it back to us for the refreshments that we're going to get. So we had lots of good times with those cousins. It's nice to
That's
have
awesome.
cousins about your age. One thing I remember when I was in high school, and I tried my best not to get in big trouble anytime because I knew my dad would tan my feathers. Uh, that's a nice way of saying give me a little pop on the bottom. But I was in high school at that point. And so we had a group to come over to I can't think, I think maybe we were working on a play or something for the high school. And so we just decided, and I was not part of the ringleader, I just was one of the followers that time. The boys in the group decided that they would change all the clocks that the bells that would ring. There was a bells that would ring for classes to change at certain times. They changed all those. It just screwed up everything in there. So the next morning when we got to school, there was a big hullabaloo because nobody knew what time to go to what class or what was going on or whatever. The principal got involved in it, and that was big time bad because it wasn't long till there were some rats in the group and they told on everybody that had been a part of it. I got called to the principal's office. He took us all in by ourselves. The principal was one of my dad's very good friends, which was never good because anytime anything happened at school that I was involved in, my dad knew it before I ever got home that day.
Uh-huh.
So Mr. Howard was the principal, and he wanted to know what in the world had possessed me to do that and how disappointed my dad was going to be because he was going to talk to him about it that afternoon. So I knew I was going to be in hot water when I got home. So
Yep.
I just told him I was not part of it other than just being there, laughing about the whole thing. And the ones that were doing it, I didn't squeal on them, but they got in big trouble. And then when I got home, I got grounded for a week for being involved in that activity, which I didn't really feel like was too fair because I had just been a looker on, but not really a
Yep.
instigator in that event. One thing I remember when I was growing up, and I alluded to this in my book, but it was such a funny episode. I can't help but tell it again. So you all can skip this part if you want to. But it was during the war, and soldiers would drive by our house all the time because we were near several army camps, an air base and an army camp. And so they would come by regularly, and uh, and they would throw out their address for people to write to them. And so I picked one up. I was young too. I was maybe, I don't remember how old I was during the war. How old was I during the war? Young.
Like first grade.
No, I was older than that during the war. Well, maybe it was after the war, but anyway, that doesn't matter. So I got the address, and I decided his name, I remember today, is Anthony Alessi, and he was from New York City. Well, I wrote him back and told him I appreciated what he was doing for the service and all that sort of stuff. Well, I got a letter back immediately for him wanting to come and visit me. It's my dad picked up the mail every time at the mailbox we had downtown. He brought that letter home. I'll never forget, he handed it to me like this. He looked at me and he said, "What is this?" And I said, "Oh my goodness, I guess that's the address that I picked up when that group of soldiers drove by." And he said, "Open it and read it." And I did. And he listened. And that guy wanted to come visit. And he said, "You write him right back and tell him he is never to show his face over here again. Your dad's got to do this." And I was so embarrassed, but I had to do that.
That is pretty funny.
Oh my goodness. One thing about that time, during that time, your dad, the story he told earlier, um, we had an air base nearby, and during the war, they would come by and they would drop bags of flour, practicing dropping bombs. And we had a lot of different fields around our house of crops that were being grown. And so they
Uh-huh.
would drop a lot of those bags of flour on those crops as they practiced. That was
Wow.
a different time in the world that you
Yep.
girls have never experienced. And it was scary and it was interesting too, some of the things that happened.
That is very interesting. Cool. Well, thank you for the stories. We'll take a break here and catch up on other stuff another time.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Yeah.